Again, my question to you guys was, are sanctions on Russia working? If you're watching on replay, please comment below in the comment section. But right now, we've got about 1,000 of you that have voted in the last few seconds. And 97% of you say no. Now, obviously, everybody's definition of working will slightly differ. I'm just going to show you the latest news. This is a headline from Reuters just yesterday. So this is April 26th. And they're saying Russian ruble hits more than 2-year high versus the euro before steadying near 77. So just to be clear, they're saying that the Russian ruble, Russia's currency, is at its highest value against the euro in 2 years. Wow. That's intriguing, to say the least. It's very intriguing. Let's look at the dollar. $1 in rubles is 75. 75 rubles to the dollar. That's quite that's quite impressive, because if we look at October 2021, so I'm going well before the war, right? It was 72 to the dollar. If we look at February 6th, it was 75 to the dollar. So actually the ruble has gone back to exactly the same value it was before the war started. Now, obviously, this is not the only metric. This is not the only way that you can tell whether sanctions are working or not. You know, they say that sanctions are to punish Putin and punish oligarchs. We all know, and I covered this extensively, sanctions are economic warfare, and the only people that get hurt are civilians. So, you know, Putin's lifestyle, his wealth, his resources are not going to change. The same for Bashar al-Assad, for Maduro. It's not how this works. The idea is let's strangle this country and cause so much upset and misery that the people will rise up and get rid of this leader that we don't like for us. That's the whole idea. Nevertheless, this is at odds with what they've been telling us. They've been telling us they're going to destroy Russia's economy, and they were gloating about it, right? They were very happy about it. And the ruble's doing just as good as before the war as it was, I mean, with the US dollar, but we're talking about the euro. It's at a 2-year high. That's wild. That's wild. Now, of course, there are caveats. So let me walk you through this. They're saying the ruble had gained 0.3% to trade at 76.9 versus the euro. And that's its strongest mark since early March 2020. And it was 0.1% stronger against the dollar. They're saying movements in the ruble are artificially limited by capital controls imposed by the central bank. So this is the criticism that a lot of people say. They say, yeah, you think the ruble's doing okay, you think the Russian economy looks good, but it's because of all these strict capital controls, it's all of the strict measures. For example, as soon as the sanctions on Russia came down, one of the measures they took was they ordered any company that's making most of its profits in a foreign currency, for example, dollars, to sell 80% of that in exchange for rubles. So that would, of course, drive up the value of the ruble. That's one example, of course. And we went through all of this, but let's continue. They're saying that movements in the ruble are artificially limited by capital controls imposed by the central bank, and the economy faces soaring inflation, capital flight, and the risk of a possible debt default after the West imposed tough sanctions. Russian companies due to pay income tax on Thursday, so that's April 28th, should give the ruble additional support this week. But the payment period for Russia's mineral extraction tax ended on Monday, which could limit upside for the ruble. So basically, it's already gone as much as it could, taking that into consideration. Payments in April may have hit a new record, say analysts, and then they say, quote, during this week, foreign currency sales by exporters, after a recent easing of currency controls, could practically end. The ruble probably will come under pressure. The market is also looking ahead to Friday's rate decision. So this is very important. The central bank is widely expected to cut its key interest rate by 200 basis points. So that's something where, again, the Russian central bank, they got half of their assets frozen, and suddenly they started imposing all these measures on interest rates, flight of capital. You saw queues of people lining up to withdraw all their money, and they also put restrictions that have helped the ruble go up. For example, one thing is making gas payments in rubles, right? They've told European countries or unfriendly countries, you have to pay us in rubles. And once again, when you're doing that, because the Europeans are paying 200 to 800 million euros a day to the Russians for energy. And they've bought more this quarter than usual. So my point is that every single day you basically have 200 to 800 million euros worth of rubles that would be going to Russia under this new scheme. So obviously you have to buy a lot of rubles, and that drives up its value. It's not the only measure. We obviously just went through some of the others, but it is important, and it's at odds to what they're telling us. Here, this is a piece I just wanted to go through with you guys. Indian Express, and it says sanctions hit Russian economy, although Putin says otherwise. Nearly 2 months into the Russia-Ukraine war, the Kremlin has taken extraordinary steps to blunt an economic counteroffensive from the West. While Russia can claim some symbolic victories, the full impact of Western sanctions is starting to be felt in very real ways. As the West moved to cut off Russia's access to its foreign reserves, limit imports of key technologies, and take other restrictive actions, the Kremlin launched some drastic measures to protect the economy. These included hiking interest rates to as high as 20%, instituting capital controls, and forcing Russian businesses to convert their profits into rubles. Yeah, that's what I was just telling you about a few minutes ago, about the 80%. So as a result, the value of the ruble has recovered after an initial plunge, which you can see here. That was the plunge. On this graph, it's a rise, but it's the same. We're talking about a plunge compared to the dollar. And so last week, the central bank reversed part of its interest rate increase. Russian President Vladimir Putin felt emboldened and proclaimed, evoking World War II imagery, that the country had withstood the West's blitz of sanctions. So according to an economics professor at Indiana University, he says that the government wants to paint a picture that things are not as bad as they actually are. They're saying in this article that things are that bad. So what are they pointing to? They're saying that Russia's enduring its worst bout of inflation in 2 decades. Rosstat, the state's economic statistics agency, has said inflation last month hit 17.3%, which is the highest level since 2002. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, say consumer prices in developing countries are set to rise 8.7% this year, up from 5.9% last year. So that's just to give you an idea, right? That usually the rise should be between it should be from 5.9 last year, and this year they would rise 8.7. Meanwhile, in Russia, it's 17.3%. So again, inflation is a huge problem, right? Very, very big problem. When I was covering what's happening in Yemen, again, by comparison, they're saying it's bad in Russia because it's 17% inflation. Yemen has 40% inflation because of the Saudi-led fuel embargo, which is backed by the US and the UK. Again, just to give some context. But yeah, this is not good. Now, some Russian companies, the article says, have been forced to shut down. Several reports say a tank manufacturer had to stop production due to lack of parts. That's exactly what we were talking about earlier, right? US officials point to the closing of Lada auto plants, a brand made by the Russian company Avtovaz and majority owned by French automaker Renault, as a sign of sanctions having an effect. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think that's necessarily a sign of economic ruin. Just to give you a counterexample, when the United States pulled out of the nuclear deal in May 2018, and Donald Trump reimposed sanctions on Iran, the banking sector, the oil sector, a lot of companies had made big investments in Iran after the nuclear deal was signed 2 years earlier, and they had to suddenly pull out of Iran because they were afraid of being hit with secondary sanctions, right? Because the idea is that I'm punishing Iran. If you deal with Iran, I'll punish you too. I'll take I'll freeze your assets, I'll fine you, put you in jail. There's a multitude of things. That's how sanctions work. It's like we're going to isolate the target. And so that could just be Renault wanting to comply with the sanctions. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but that's what it looks like to me, because that's why many companies have pulled out of Russia. They don't want to be hit with sanctions. Moscow's mayor says the city is looking at 200,000 job losses from foreign companies shutting down operations. Again, that's mostly due to sanctions, but yes, this obviously impacts the economy, no question. More than 300 companies have pulled out, and international supply chains have largely shut down after container company Maersk, UPS, DHL, and other transportation firms exited Russia. Yep. Russia's facing a historic default on its bonds, which will likely freeze the country out of the debt market for years. And meanwhile, Treasury officials and most economists urge patience, saying that sanctions take months to have their full effect. If Russia can't get appropriate amounts of capital, parts, or supplies over time, that will cause even more factories and businesses to shut down, leading to higher unemployment. Honestly, it's kind of weird in a way when you read about this, because you have some people who are basically like gloating about it. Like, just wait, it's going to take some time, then they're really going to feel it. Again, man, this doesn't affect Putin at all. If that's your supposed target, it really just hurts Russians the most. You know, they just said you have about 200,000 people losing their jobs. Is Putin losing his job? No. Those are ordinary Russians losing their jobs. But I get it. Because right now, the conventional wisdom is, you are an ordinary Russian, we want to punish you anyway. And that's why they're banning Russian players from competing at Wimbledon. You know, there's a whole slew of issues, obviously, right? But they've basically, this is how sanctions work. They always claim, oh, we're targeting this president or this government, and they always hurt the civilians. I told you this is going to happen. This is just one facet of that. They're talking about the spike in prices. Residents of one Moscow suburb said 19-liter jugs of drinking water they regularly order have become nearly 35% more expensive than before. In supermarkets and stores in their area, the price for 1 kilogram of sugar has risen 77%. Some vegetables cost 30% to 50% more. Do you see how they're ruining people's lives? I really struggle to see how this has any strategic value. I'm sorry, but you show me one example of sanctions working where you had the population rising up and getting rid of the leader because the State Department wanted them to. It doesn't exist. It only kills people. That's all it does. It literally kills people. Because they're telling you, oh, it's hard to get replacement parts. Yeah, not just for, industry. The healthcare sector also can't get replacement parts. What do you think that does to people who depend on medical equipment, who need to go into hospital, who need to go into dialysis? What do you think that does to them? How does that punish the Russian government? It doesn't. It punishes Russians. And really, it's disgusting. They gloat about this. I'm just going to finish by saying one thing. I'll tell you honestly. The sanctions are hurting Russia. There's no question. Does that mean it's the demise of Russia? I don't know. You can take it. Let's take Iran as an example. Iran's been under sanctions for a long time. Up until the war in Ukraine started, so 2 months ago, Iran was the number one sanctioned country, not Russia. Now Russia's number one. But before that, it was Iran. And if you look at Iran, while the sanctions are not easy, let's not minimize that, they made big strides. They made their own COVID-19 vaccine, right? That's not easy. They're one of the best countries in nanotechnology. They've developed a enormously capable defense industry. Cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, which in their shoes, you need that. When you have so many enemies, you need that. This is, of course, not even to make mention of all the other strides that they've taken. My point is that, yes, the sanctions hurt, but countries like Iran are very resourceful. And if Iran can do that, Russia can do that too. You really, people underestimate the Russians. They will come up with alternatives for everything. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy and that it's not hurting people, but I don't think that it's like, oh, it's a done deal. It's like we put it in the oven. Just wait an hour, it'll be done. No, that's not going to happen. Putin's not going anywhere, and the Russians not going to get rid of him because sanctions never work. They only hurt people, but they know this. And then they try to come and sell you this idea that it's like, oh, we're punishing Putin's oligarchs. Bullshit. Those people shit money. You're not punishing them. You're punishing civilians. But of course, they're never going to tell you that truth. And I think there's a bit of an arrogance in there to think like, oh, well, it's just a question of time. The Russians are done with. No. This is not the same situation as usual. I told you many, many times that we're transitioning to a multipolar world. So this idea that the West holds all the keys and they control the levers and it's a done deal and they're going to get their way, I wouldn't be so sure. They've been sanctioning Syria and Iran for decades. Did the Islamic Republic go anywhere? Did the Ba'athist Party go anywhere? No, they're not going anywhere. Putin's not going anywhere. And right now, what's happened in Ukraine is they've basically shoved Russia into China's arms. And, China, Russia, they have their own alternatives to SWIFT. I really doubt that it's just from one day to the next, they're going to suddenly have this booming financial payment system or a financial and payment system that can rival SWIFT. Of course not. That's going to take a long time. But in the long run, I think that this was really a strategic blunder because they say, Putin miscalculated. Yeah, maybe you could say that in the short term inside Ukraine, but on a global scale, I wouldn't be so sure because you've basically you've taught Russia a lesson, but not in the way that you wanted to. You're teaching Russia a lesson not to depend on the West for anything ever again. And by extension, as a result, subsequently, the Russians are going to go and look elsewhere. And you're going to see the emergence of a more powerful Russia, a more powerful China, a multipolar world. And, if your whole idea is to protect the West and protect Western hegemony, you just screwed up. So while the, mainstream media, they want to laugh at Russians not being able to buy groceries and suffering and losing their jobs, the irony is that people in Germany are also paying more. People in Europe are paying more. Just tell me right now in the comments, where are you guys living? Are you in the States? Are you in Europe? How much are you paying for gas? I've seen many of my followers and my fans telling me they're paying like $4 or $5 a gallon. And again, I have to talk about Yemen. They're paying $9.50 a gallon in Yemen. Can you imagine? One of the poorest countries on earth. Just to put that into context, how much are you paying? Luke is saying $6 a gallon. Dark Cloud says $6 a gallon. Yeah, let's be clear. Like, this didn't just start with the war in Ukraine. Even before that, you had a fuel and an energy crisis in Europe, in the West, and that's not even to make mention of the Fed and their outrageous printing. But on top of that, you cannot deny. I mean, we looked at this together. You see how once the US and the UK, they start sanctioning Russian energy imports, the prices go up even further. And Biden, all of a sudden, he's telling the truth, and he says, yeah, there are going to be food shortages. Well, hold on a second. You didn't say that before. I'm pretty sure no one would be, hell-bent on your little project to arm Ukraine to the teeth and arm Nazis in Ukraine if they knew there were going to be food shortages and gas is going to be who knows how much a gallon in later on. And of course, in Europe, you're going to see a lot of disruption, people losing their jobs because, as they get less and less Russian energy or the prices go up, you can't just expect every industry or service sector or, or agriculture to keep up. So the irony here, I think, and again, I take no pleasure in saying this at all. On the contrary, it's bad. You're seeing for once the West sanctioning another country, but this is not just any country. It's Russia. It's a huge country. It's a very important country. The Europeans depend on it. And now the West are going to feel those sanctions themselves. Usually they don't. The British government and the Americans, they go and sanction Iran and Syria, and people in the UK and Europe, they don't even know what a sanction is. You tell them sanctions, they're like, what is that? They think it's like some peaceful alternative to war. They have no clue. They're living in this, this bliss, this ignorance. But this time is different, and the food prices are going up in Germany, and the gas prices are going up, and you want to laugh at Russia. I wouldn't be so arrogant. Remember also, Russia supplies a lot of fertilizer. Russia is one of the world's main fertilizer suppliers. This is just from a few weeks ago. German consumers to be hit by further price hikes in supermarkets. I covered this with you guys. As I was telling you, Russia is known as the world's top fertilizer seller. The increasing costs are now forcing farmers to cut back on production or use less fertilizer, which means they could have to harvest smaller crops. And they're talking about the US, of course. So this is having a huge ripple effect worldwide, and I wouldn't be so quick to shrug it off and laugh at it and think, oh, it's just a question of time, the Russians done for. Man.